A battered scout ship limped out of swirling, luminous gas clouds as monstrous silhouettes lunging through the nebula faded behind it. The vessel's hull bore deep gouges, revealing the metallic skeleton beneath its carbon composite skin. Emergency lights flickered across the command deck, bathing the exhausted crew in pulses of crimson. Alara Keene, the ship's navigator, gasped. "We made it. But at what cost?" Her trembling fingers traced across the holographic display, confirming their trajectory away from the luminous expanse of the Argol Veil. Around her, the twisted remains of supply pods littered the deck. Through the viewport, the echo of distant roars still seemed to reverberate, though logically she knew it was impossible to hear anything through the vacuum of space. The crew's celebration was subdued, a series of exhausted sighs and weary pats on shoulders. Pilot Ray Sparks Ortega slumped against his control yoke, knuckles white from the death grip he'd maintained during their desperate escape. Dr. Soren Vale was already cataloging specimens salvaged from their expedition, his clinical detachment a stark contrast to the terror they'd just experienced. Commander Jax Monroe stood at the forward viewport, shoulders rigid beneath his tactical harness. As the nebula's swirling gases receded behind them, he slowly lowered his visor. His weathered face appeared hollow in the emergency lighting, eyes haunted by something beyond the immediate danger they'd escaped. "Commander." Alara approached, datapad clutched to her chest. "I've charted our route back to Station Halcyon. We should arrive within 48 hours, assuming we don't encounter any—" "You haven't seen the Gentle Ones?" Monroe interrupted, his voice trembling with an emotion Alara couldn't immediately identify. It wasn't fear, at least, not the same fear that had gripped them during the beast attack. This was something more complex, something that made the veteran explorer's hands shake as he stared back toward the nebula they'd barely escaped. The Argyle Veil stretched across 3 light-years of space, a living, color-shifting nebula, unlike any other discovered in humanity's tentative expansion beyond Earth. From a distance, it resembled an aurora caught in perpetual motion, emerald gases twisting into cobalt currents, shot through with veins of gold and crimson. The phenomenon had been designated an astronomical curiosity until the discovery of bioluminescent flora and fauna existing within its unique ecosystem. Navigation through the veil was treacherous even before accounting for its inhabitants. Gravity pockets bent trajectories in unpredictable ways, while visibility was constantly distorted by refracted starlight. What should have been straight paths became labyrinthine journeys, and what appeared solid might be nothing but light scattered across gas particles. Station Halcyon had been established 5 years earlier as humanity's first research outpost at the nebula's edge. Built into a massive asteroid to provide natural shielding from the Veil's radiation. The station's cavernous corridors hummed with energy fields and the constant drone of environmental systems. Originally designed to house 50 researchers, the population had swelled to nearly 300 as corporate interests recognized the potential profit in nebula resources. The station's biotech labs were its heart. Clinically sterile chambers where scientists studied the unique properties of nebula life forms. The research promised revolutionary medical applications, particularly in neural regeneration. But the station's population had grown weary, haunted by increasingly frequent beast attacks. What had begun as a frontier of discovery had evolved into a besieged outpost, dependent on supply runs like the one Monroe's crew had just attempted. This push beyond humanity's safe corridors was largely corporate-sponsored. Exploration teams like Monroe's were underpaid and under-equipped, sent into the unknown with promises of bonuses that rarely materialized. The real money flowed to executives back in the solar system's core worlds, who spoke enthusiastically about expanding humanity's horizons from the safety of luxury habitats. Among the station's population, rumors had spread of peace heralds, gentle nebula dwellers believed to possess healing capabilities far beyond modern medicine. These entities were said to cure neural disorders with a single touch, restore lost limbs, even repair genetic damage. Most serious scientists dismissed such tales as the desperate hopes of an isolated population, but the stories persisted, growing more elaborate with each retelling. Commander Jax Monroe had survived 3 decades of frontier exploration, and his body bore the evidence of close calls. A cybernetic left arm replaced the original loss to a mining accident in the Kuiper Belt. A jagged scar traced from his right temple to his jaw. A memento from a pirate raid near Europa. His dark hair had gone silver at the temples, contrasting with bronze skin weathered by radiation exposure. Monroe's reputation was built on pragmatism, bordering on cynicism. He calculated risks with cold precision, made difficult decisions without hesitation, and never indulged in speculation about what might lie beyond the next horizon. Yet those who served under him longest recognized the fierce protectiveness beneath his gruff exterior. Monroe brought his people home, whatever the cost. What few suspected was the commander's hidden yearning to believe in wonder. Decades of witnessing humanity's expansion had shown him the pattern. New worlds discovered, then immediately assessed for resource extraction. New life forms encountered, then categorized as either threats or commodities. Something in Monroe longed to discover something that would transcend this cycle, though he'd never admit it aloud. Navigator Alara Keene had come to frontier exploration by a different path. Born to an academic family on Mars, she had been expected to follow her parents into theoretical physics. Instead, she'd chosen the practical application of stellar cartography, mapping the uncharted regions where theory met reality. Her brilliant mind constructed multi-dimensional models of space-time, allowing ships to navigate anomalies that would otherwise prove fatal. At 32, Alara carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knows her value. Her copper-red hair was typically pulled back in a practical braid, keeping it clear of the holographic interfaces she manipulated with graceful precision. Scientific curiosity drove her forward, each new discovery feeding her insatiable need to understand the universe's mechanics. What her crewmates saw less often was Alara's struggle with survivor's guilt. 2 years earlier, her partner, fellow navigator Eliza Chen, had been lost during a beast attack similar to the one they'd just escaped. Alara had survived by sealing herself in a navigation pod while the section containing Eliza was breached. The memory haunted her sleep and shadowed her waking hours, driving her to perfect navigational systems that might prevent similar losses. Dr. Soren Vale presented a study in contrasts. In the research lab, the xenobiologist moved with deliberate precision, his slender fingers manipulating specimens with almost artistic care. During crises, his heart rate barely elevated, his voice remaining calm and measured while others panicked. This composed exterior masked an obsessive personality, driven to classify and understand every aspect of Nebula life. Vale's ethical flexibility had raised concerns among some crew members. His experiments occasionally crossed lines that others found troubling, the suffering of specimens justified by potential scientific breakthroughs. Monroe kept him on the crew for his unparalleled expertise, while maintaining careful oversight of his research protocols. What none of them knew was Vale's secret agenda. Beyond his official research, the xenobiologist was determined to capture a Gentle One specimen. Corporate contacts had promised him not just wealth, but his own fully funded research institute if he could deliver proof of the entity's healing properties. This ambition consumed him, though he hid it behind meticulous research and collaborative language. Pilot Ray Sparks. Ortega rounded out the core crew. The ex-smuggler had turned his illicit skills to legitimate employment after a close call with colonial authorities. His weathered face was quick to break into a grin, his streetwise humor providing necessary relief during tense situations. Behind the controls of their scout ship, his reflexes bordered on precognitive, anticipating spatial distortions before instruments could detect them. Ortega's motivation was simpler than his colleagues. A daughter waited back on Earth, a 10-year-old he hadn't seen in person for 3 years. Video calls and occasional gift packages were poor substitutes for presence. but the frontier pay would fund her education and give her opportunities he'd never had. This drove his insistence on returning alive from each mission, his seemingly reckless maneuvers always calculated to maximize survival chances. 72 hours before their desperate escape. The crew had gathered in Station Halcyon's briefing room. Holographic displays showed the supply route through the Argol Veil, a sinuous path that avoided the worst of the known gravity anomalies. The cargo is primarily medical, Station Director Cassidy explained, her holographic presence flickering slightly due to bandwidth limitations. Regenerative compounds for our elderly population, neural stabilizers for those experiencing veil sickness, and standard antivirals. Time-sensitive materials. Commander. Monroe nodded, studying the proposed route. 48 hours round trip, assuming no complications. Ortega, your assessment? Sparks leaned forward, manipulating the holographic display to highlight several regions. 3 known hunting grounds for the beasts along this trajectory. We can divert around the largest 2, but this one, he indicated a narrow passage. We'll have to push through and hope for the best. The cargo pod's containment fields should mask our energy signature. Vale offered. My latest modifications incorporate elements that mimic the nebula's ambient radiation. In theory, the beasts should overlook us. In theory, Monroe repeated dryly. Keen. Alternatives? Alara shook her head. Any other route adds at least 30 hours to the journey, given the time sensitivity of the medical supplies. Understood. Monroe closed the holographic display with a gesture. We launch in 6 hours. Standard protocol. Minimal emissions. Emergency responses drilled and ready. Vale, I want those containment fields triple-checked before loading. The mission had begun smoothly enough. Their scout ship, the Perseverance, slipped from Halcyon's docking bay with minimal thrust, conserving energy for the journey ahead. The massive cargo pod attached to their ventral hull contained supplies that would sustain the station for another month, assuming they delivered it intact. As they entered the nebula's outer boundary, the universe transformed around them. Standard visuals became useless as light refracted through the gases in unpredictable patterns. Alara's specialized navigational system projected a 3-dimensional map that compensated for these distortions, showing the crew the actual spatial relationships rather than the illusions created by the veil. Entering first density gradient, Sparks announced, his hands dancing across the pilot controls. Adjusting buoyancy compensators? The ship shuddered slightly as it passed through what felt like a membrane. The nebula's gases growing thicker around them. Bioluminescent particles drifted past the viewports, tiny organisms that fed on the energy generated by the veil itself. In the right combination, they created mesmerizing patterns, swirling mandalas of light that could hypnotize an unwary observer. Magnificent, Vale murmured, recording the patterns with his personal scanner. Each time we enter, the populations have shifted. There's evidence of evolution occurring at an accelerated rate. Stay focused, Monroe warned. Beauty's killed as many explorers as terror. They progressed deeper. The ship moving through chambers of colored gas separated by membranes of varying density. Alara's navigation system plotted their course through this 3-dimensional maze, seeking the path of least resistance toward their destination, a supply depot established at a stable node within the veil. The first sign of trouble came 6 hours into their journey. A subtle vibration passed through the ship's hull, so slight that most crew members didn't notice. Alara felt it through her fingertips on the navigation console. Energy fluctuation, she reported, checking her instruments. Something's disrupting the field 15 degrees to port, distance unknown due to refraction. Monroe moved to her station, eyes narrowing as he studied the readings. Natural phenomenon? Unlikely. The pattern suggests biological movement, large-scale biological movement. Before Monroe could respond, the ship's ambient sound sensors picked up something that made every crew member freeze. Muffled shrieks that seemed to come from everywhere at once. vibrating through the nebula gases themselves. "Beasts," Sparks whispered, already initiating evasive protocols, multiple signatures, converging pattern. Through the viewport, darkness coalesced within the colorful gases. Massive silhouettes took shape, hulking entities with tendril-limbed appendages stretching dozens of meters from central masses. Their movements created vortices in the nebula, pulling luminous gases into spiraling patterns around their obsidian forms. "Masks," Monroe ordered sharply. Every crew member quickly donned respiratory protection. The beasts were known to release toxins that affected human neural function, inducing hallucinations and panic. Sparks's hands flew across his controls, the ship banking sharply as a tendril lashed through space where they had been moments before. "Can't outrun them in this density," he reported tensely. "Need a diversion or a hiding spot." "There." Alara indicated a dense pocket of refracted light on her navigational display. "Gravity anomaly creating a visual dead zone. If we can reach it." "Do it," Monroe commanded. The ship surged forward, engines straining against the thick nebula gases. Behind them, the beast's shrieks intensified, the sound resonating through the hull despite the vacuum that should have prevented its transmission. "They're not following our emissions," Vale observed, monitoring the creature's movements. "They're tracking something else." The cargo, his eyes widened as alarms blared from his station. "Containment field fluctuation in the medical pod." Monroe swore under his breath. "Can you stabilize it?" Attempting to compensate. Vale's fingers flew across his interface. "The field modulation isn't matching the nebula's current state. It's standing out like a beacon." A violent impact rocked the ship as a beast slammed into their stern. Warning lights cascaded across every console as integrity fields struggled to compensate. A second impact targeted the cargo pod directly, claws or tendrils scraping against the reinforced container. "Diverting emergency power to thrusters," Sparks called out, executing a desperate corkscrew maneuver that momentarily disoriented their attackers. The respite lasted seconds. A massive shape materialized directly in their path, the largest beast they'd encountered, its central mass pulsing with dark energy. Tendrils extended toward them like a grotesque web, closing off escape routes. "Brace for impact," Monroe shouted as Sparks attempted to thread through an impossibly narrow gap between appendages. They almost made it. The ship's prow slipped past the reaching tendrils, but the cargo pod took a direct hit. The containment field collapsed with a cascade of blue-white energy, and the beast's appendage punctured the pod's exterior. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically, preserving most of the cargo, but damage had been done. "Status," Monroe demanded once they'd put some distance between themselves and the immediate threat. "Hull integrity at 78%, Alara reported. "Cargo pod breached. Section 3 compromised. We've lost approximately 20% of the medical supplies." Val was focused on his monitors, expression shifting from concern to fascination. "Commander, something unexpected is happening. The breached section contained neural regeneration spores. They've been released into the nebula, but they're not dissipating as expected." "Meaning?" Monroe moved to look over Vale's shoulder. "They're aggregating, forming patterns." Vale manipulated the scanner controls. "And the beasts are retreating from them." Through the viewport, they could see a luminous cloud expanding from the damaged cargo pod, tiny particles glowing with soft azure light, arranging themselves in geometric patterns that rippled and pulsed. The dark shapes of the nebula beasts were indeed moving away, their shrieks changing tenor from hunting calls to what almost sounded like alarm. "This wasn't in the cargo manifest," Monroe said flatly, giving Vale a hard look. The xenobiologist had the grace to look slightly abashed. "It was a subsidiary experiment. The spores have shown remarkable properties in controlled settings. I wanted to observe their behavior in native nebula conditions. Without authorization, it wasn't a question." The potential benefits outweighed the protocol concerns. Vale replied, unapologetic. And now we're seeing something remarkable. These spores may be attracting the gentle ones the station residents speak of. Alara's attention snapped from her navigation console. You believe those stories? I believe there's usually truth at the core of persistent rumors, Vale answered, especially when multiple witnesses report similar phenomena independently. Monroe cut the discussion short. We've completed the primary mission parameters. The majority of the medical supplies are intact. We're returning to Station Halcyon immediately. Commander, Vale protested, this is an unprecedented opportunity. The spores are creating a safe zone the beasts won't enter. We could investigate. Negative. We've sustained damage and lost cargo. Priority is returning to the station. Monroe's tone left no room for argument. The next 12 hours passed in tense silence as they navigated back toward the nebula's edge. The damaged cargo pod had been stabilized, though Vale spent an unusual amount of time monitoring the breach site. Occasionally, instruments detected distant beast activity, but none approached their vessel. During a brief rest period, Alara found Sparks in the ship's tiny galley, nursing a cup of synthetic coffee. The pilot's usual humor was subdued, his eyes fixed on a small holographic image, his daughter, frozen in mid-laugh. She's beautiful, Alara offered, preparing her own beverage. Sparks nodded, a ghost of his usual smile appearing. Smart, too. Too smart for her old man sometimes. Last call. She was explaining orbital mechanics to me, he chuckled. Probably could fly this bucket better than I can. You'll see her soon, Alara said gently. Another 2 runs, you said? Yeah. Contract completes. Then I'm grounded for good, taking a teaching position at the Lunar Flight Academy. He deactivated the hologram with a sigh. If we make it back this time, we always do. Alara tried to sound more confident than she felt. Sure, Sparks didn't sound convinced. But something's different this run. Vale's up to something, more than usual. And the commander. He shook his head. You heard what he said about the gentle ones. I've never heard Monroe talk like that. Alara had been turning that moment over in her mind as well. He sounded afraid. Monroe doesn't do afraid. Cautious. Sure. Calculated. Always. But that was something else. Sparks lowered his voice further. I looked up his service record. There's a redacted mission from 8 years back, another Vale expedition. Only Monroe and 1 other crew member returned. No explanation given for what happened to the others. Before Alara could respond, the ship's alert system pulsed softly, her navigation sensors detecting an anomaly. When she returned to the bridge, the readings confirmed her suspicion. Their course had altered by 3 degrees. Sparks, she called to the pilot as he entered behind her. Did you adjust our trajectory during the last shift? He frowned, checking the controls. Negative. Course should be exactly as you plotted. Monroe arrived moments later, immediately noting the discrepancy. Explanation. Alara ran a diagnostic. No system malfunction. This was a deliberate course change. Her eyes moved to the only empty station. Where's Vale? They found the xenobiologist in the cargo bay, surrounded by portable research equipment hastily connected to the ship's systems. A portion of the damaged cargo pod had been sealed off with a secondary containment field, creating an impromptu laboratory. Explain yourself, Monroe demanded, voice dangerously quiet. Vale didn't look up from his instruments, making necessary adjustments to salvage the mission's scientific potential. By altering our course without authorization? By ensuring we don't waste an opportunity that won't come again. Vale finally turned to face them, his expression animated with an intensity that bordered on fervor. The spores are acting as a beacon. They're calling the gentle ones to us. You don't know that, Alara objected. I do, Vale gestured to his displays. The spore patterns are forming communication sequences, complex mathematical progressions that couldn't occur randomly. Something is responding to them, directing their organization. Monroe stepped forward, physically inserting himself between Vale and his equipment. "Return us to our original course, now." "I can't do that." Vale's composure slipped, revealing the obsession beneath. "Do you understand what the Gentle Ones represent? Not just healing potential, evolutionary advancement. They've adapted to exist in an environment that should be lethal. They've developed abilities that defy our understanding of biology. Corporate promised you a big payday, didn't they?" Sparks interjected, eyes narrowing. "Bring back a specimen. Write your own ticket." Vale's expression confirmed the accusation. "The potential benefits extend far beyond personal gain. Think of the applications: neural regeneration for degenerative conditions, radiation resistance for deep space exploration, possibly even cellular immortality." "At what cost?" Alara asked quietly. "If these entities are as advanced as you believe, what gives us the right to capture them for study? The same right that's driven every scientific advancement in human history." Vale replied without hesitation. "The right of progress." Monroe had heard enough. "You're relieved of duty. Doctor, Sparks, escort him to his quarters and lock access." What happened next occurred with shocking speed. Vale had anticipated the commander's response. His hand moved to a concealed control panel, activating a protocol he'd embedded in the ship's systems. Emergency bulkheads slammed down, separating Monroe and Alara from Sparks, and from the bridge. "I regret the theatrics." Vale's voice came through the communication system, "but I cannot allow short-sightedness to prevail. We're proceeding to the coordinates indicated by the spore patterns. Once I've secured a specimen, we'll return to the station." What Vale hadn't anticipated was Sparks's response. The pilot, trapped on the same side of the bulkhead as the xenobiologist, acted with the reflexes that had kept him alive through years of smuggling operations. He launched himself at Vale, managing to disable the security override before Vale could stop him. The resulting struggle was brief but violent. Vale, desperate to protect his opportunity, grabbed a research implement, a tissue separator with a razor edge. Sparks deflected the first swing but caught the second across his rib cage, a deep gash that immediately began pulsing blood. The security bulkheads retracted as Monroe and Alara regained control of the systems. They arrived to find Sparks applying pressure to his wound. Vale unconscious from a well-placed strike to his temple. "Med Bay, now," Monroe ordered, helping Sparks while Alara secured Vale. Once Sparks was stabilized in the medical pod, automatic systems working to repair the damage, the full extent of Vale's sabotage became clear. The xenobiologist had disabled the main engines, leaving only maneuvering thrusters operational. More critically, he'd released more of the specialized spores into the nebula surrounding them, creating what amounted to a beacon that extended for kilometers in all directions. "Can we contain them?" Monroe asked, as Alara worked feverishly at the environmental controls. She shook her head. "They're already dispersed too widely, and they're continuing to organize into those mathematical sequences Vale mentioned." She hesitated. "Commander, I'm detecting unusual readings from the crew as well. The spores appear to be affecting our physiology." "Explain," Monroe demanded, though something in his expression suggested he already knew. "Elevated activity in the limbic system increased production of certain neurotransmitters." Alara checked another reading. "It's subtle, but definite. Enhanced empathic response, possible minor hallucinatory effects." "You're experiencing visions," Monroe stated flatly. It wasn't a question. Alara didn't immediately deny it. For the past hour, she'd been seeing flickers at the edge of her perception, patterns of light that seemed to form momentarily into recognizable shapes before dissolving. "How did you know?" "Because I've seen this before." Monroe moved to the viewport, staring out at the nebula gases swirling around them. 8 years ago. Another expedition. deeper into the veil than anyone had gone before. We encountered the spores then, too, not in a controlled container, but in their natural state. The commander rarely spoke of his past missions, especially not the classified ones. Alara remained silent, letting him continue at his own pace. The effects started small. Increased empathy, just as you described. Dreams that felt like more than dreams. Then the visions began while we were awake, glimpses of light forming into figures. By the third day, half the crew was convinced we were receiving communication from sentient nebula entities. The other half thought it was spore-induced madness. "What did you think?" Alara asked softly. Monroe's jaw tightened. "I thought we needed to complete our mission and return to safety. But our xenobiologist, Drayson, became obsessed, just like Vale. He deliberately exposed himself to higher concentrations, claimed he was establishing deeper communication. What happened to him?" He led 3 others into an unmapped section of the Vale, following what he called guides of light. Only one returned, incoherent, physically transformed. His cellular structure had begun to alter, adapting to nebula conditions. He died 2 days later, still trying to tell us about the gentle ones. Alara processed this information against what they were currently experiencing. "And you believe we're on the same path?" "The parallels are exact." Monroe turned back from the viewport, his expression grim. "We need to purge the spores from our system and find a way to restart the engines." Before they could implement any plan, the ship's sensors registered a massive energy surge from the depths of the nebula. Every instrument spiked simultaneously, then went dark as systems overloaded. The emergency lighting activated, casting the bridge in a dull red glow. "What was that?" Sparks called weakly from the medical pod. Alara checked the few systems still responding. "Some kind of electromagnetic pulse, but with properties I've never seen before. It's restructuring the nebula gases around us." Through the viewport, they could see the truth of her assessment. The colorful chaos of the veil was organizing itself, gases separating by density and hue to form a tunnel of swirling light extending into the distance. At the far end, a soft radiance pulsed in a rhythm that somehow felt inviting. "They're creating a path," Alara whispered. "Or a trap," Monroe countered, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. In the medical bay, Vale regained consciousness. The xenobiologist took in the situation with remarkable speed, his eyes widening at the sight of the nebula's transformation. "It's happening," he breathed, attempting to sit up despite his restraints. "They're responding to the mathematical sequences. This proves sentient interaction." "It proves something is manipulating the environment," Monroe corrected. "That doesn't confirm sentience or benevolence." "We need to follow the path," Vale insisted. "This opportunity is not worth our lives." Monroe cut him off. The ship shuddered as another energy wave passed through it. This time, instead of damaging systems, something unexpected happened. The engines came back online, power levels stabilizing across all stations. "They fixed us," Sparks said, disbelief evident in his voice. The pilot himself looked improved as well, his wound already showing signs of accelerated healing. "Or they want us mobile for their own purposes," Monroe maintained, though his resolve was visibly weakening. Alara made a decision. "Commander, with respect, we should investigate. Our current position is unstable. That path represents the only clear route through this section of the veil. And if there is a sentient presence attempting communication..." The argument was cut short as the ship began moving on its own, drawn forward by some unseen force. The sensation wasn't violent, more like being caught in a gentle current. Attempts to reverse thrust had no effect. "We appear to be invited," Vale observed with inappropriate satisfaction. "Whether we choose to accept or not." For nearly an hour, they drifted along the constructed pathway, deeper into regions of the nebula no human had documented. The gases grew increasingly dense. Yet visibility remained perfect within their designated tunnel. Occasional pulses of energy washed over the ship, each seeming to refine their systems rather than damage them. The crew's experiences grew increasingly strange. Each reported visions that felt intensely personal, moments of profound connection or understanding. Sparks described seeing his daughter as an adult, successful and fulfilled. Alara found herself conversing with Eliza, the exchange feeling too real to dismiss as hallucination. Even Monroe admitted to experiences he wouldn't specify, though they clearly affected him deeply. Only Vale remained relatively unaffected, his scientific detachment possibly shielding him from the deeper connections the others were experiencing. He continued to monitor and record everything, preparing containment protocols for when they encountered the entities he was certain awaited them. The tunnel finally opened into what could only be described as a chamber, a vast spherical space within the nebula where gases moved in perfect geometric patterns. The ship drifted to the center and stopped, held in position by forces their instruments couldn't identify. There, Alara pointed through the viewport. "Do you see them?" At first, there appeared to be nothing but luminous mist. Then, as their eyes adjusted, shapes became visible, crystalline beings hovering in the space around their ship, six-limbed and translucent. Each radiated soft bioluminescence that shifted through spectrums both familiar and alien. They moved with fluid grace, their forms sometimes seeming solid, other times almost vaporous. "Gentle ones," Vale whispered, for once sounding genuinely awed rather than clinically interested. The entities began emitting melodic pulses that resonated through the ship's hull. Unlike the shrieking of the beasts, these sounds created harmonious patterns that seemed to communicate meaning beyond language. As the crew listened, they experienced a growing sense of shared consciousness, not invasive, but inviting. They're a collective intelligence, Alara realized. Individual entities forming a unified awareness, the patterns in her mind clarified. They maintain the nebula's balance, the beasts, the spores, the energy flows, all part of a complex ecosystem they help regulate. Val had recovered from his initial awe and was already moving toward the containment equipment he'd prepared. Extraordinary. Their crystalline structure appears to incorporate elements unknown to our periodic table. If we can secure just one specimen... No, Monroe's voice carried absolute authority. "We observe only... no specimens, no samples." "This is bigger than your command, Authority," Vale protested, continuing his preparations. "Humanity needs what they can provide." Alara stepped between Vale and his equipment. "They're sentient, not specimens. Can't you feel it? They're communicating with us, trying to help us understand." "Understanding comes through study," Vale replied, attempting to move past her. "Think of the children in hospitals who could be healed, the neural diseases that could be cured." "At what cost?" Alara persisted. "Capturing one could destroy the balance they maintain. The entire nebula ecosystem could collapse." While they argued, one of the crystalline beings approached the viewport, its luminescence intensifying as it examined the humans within. The creature's form pulsed in rhythm with the ship's systems, creating a resonance that seemed to connect them directly. Monroe found himself facing a critical decision. Vale had managed to activate a containment field, preparing to deploy it through an external port. The energy signature was already attracting the attention of the nearest entity, drawing it closer with apparent curiosity. The commander could fire the ship's defensive systems, potentially driving the Gentle Ones away while they escaped. This would protect the entities from Vale's capture attempt but destroy any possibility of peaceful contact. Alternatively, he could trust these beings they barely understood, allowing the encounter to proceed despite the risks. "Commander," Vale urged, "give the authorization. One specimen could change everything." "They already are changing everything," Alara countered. "Just not in the way you want." Monroe stared at the crystalline entity now hovering just beyond the viewport. Its luminescence pulsed in patterns that somehow conveyed both intelligence and compassion. In that moment, he recognized what had been missing from decades of exploration, the wonder he'd secretly yearned to discover. "Stand down, Vale," he ordered quietly. "No containment protocols." "You can't be serious," the xenobiologist protested. "After everything we've risked to get here." "We didn't come here for specimens. We came here because they invited us." Monroe gestured toward the gentle ones surrounding their ship. "This isn't about what we can take from them. It's about what we can learn." Vale's scientific ambition warred with the realization that he was outnumbered. In desperation, he lunged for the containment controls, determined to complete his self-appointed mission regardless of orders. Alara moved to stop him, but wasn't quick enough. Vale activated the external containment field, which shot out toward the nearest crystalline entity in a web of energy designed to ensnare and isolate it. What happened next defied their expectations. Rather than fleeing or fighting, the Gentle One simply allowed the field to surround it. Then, with a harmonic pulse that resonated throughout the ship, it transmitted energy back through the containment system. The feedback cascaded through Vale's equipment, overloading circuits and causing minor explosions across the console. The xenobiologist was thrown backward, sustaining burns to his hands and face. More significantly, the energy surge continued into the ship's systems, but instead of damaging them, it reconfigured them, optimizing functions, repairing damage, and establishing new capabilities. In the medical bay, monitoring equipment showed Vale's injuries healing almost instantly. Throughout the ship, systems operated with unprecedented efficiency. Even the structural damage from their earlier beast encounter was being repaired, molecular bonds reforming under the influence of the Gentle One's energy. "They're helping us," Sparks said in disbelief, watching as his own wound closed completely, not even a scar remaining. Outside the viewport, the Gentle Ones began a synchronized movement, their crystalline forms arranging into complex three-dimensional patterns. The harmonics they emitted intensified, conveying meaning that translated directly into understanding in the humans' minds. The message wasn't in words, but in concepts and emotions that transcended language barriers. They conveyed their role as guardians of the nebula's complex ecosystem, maintaining balance between its myriad life forms. The beasts weren't monsters, but necessary predators, controlling populations and energy distribution. The Gentle Ones themselves had evolved from the same primordial nebula life, developing consciousness and purpose over millennia. Most surprisingly, they expressed neither anger nor resentment at Vale's attempt to capture one of their kind. Instead, they communicated a profound understanding of human curiosity and need, alongside a gentle suggestion that relationship would prove more beneficial than exploitation. Monroe, his decades of exploration experience momentarily stripped away, found himself responding with uncharacteristic openness. "We seek knowledge and healing, but we've approached wrongly. How can we establish proper contact without harm?" The Gentle One's response manifested as a series of images in the minds of all crew members, a protocol for peaceful interaction. Station Halcyon could send small research teams into designated safe zones. The Gentle Ones would provide healing energies and knowledge exchange, but specimens would remain in their natural habitat, a symbiotic relationship rather than an extractive one. Even Vale, humbled by his close call and the entity's generous response, found himself reconsidering his approach. A sustained research relationship would yield more data than a single captured specimen, he admitted, scientific pragmatism adjusting to new realities. As the communication continued, the Gentle Ones gradually guided the ship back toward the nebula's edge, creating another safe passage that avoided beast territories before they departed completely. One final exchange occurred, a transfer of data into the ship's systems, containing navigational maps of the entire Vale ecosystem along with preliminary communication protocols. "They're trusting us with knowledge of their home," Alara realized, examining the remarkable detail of the maps. This would have taken decades for us to compile. Trust must be reciprocated, Monroe said, coming to a decision. When we return to Station Halcyon, we establish new protocols. The nebula becomes a protected zone. Research continues, but under strict ethical guidelines. The corporate sponsors won't like that, Sparks noted. They'll adapt when they see the potential of sustained cooperation. Monroe's tone suggested he would accept no opposition on this point. We have something more valuable than specimens. We have contact. 2 days later, their scout ship docked at Station Halcyon. The crew's return caused immediate sensation, particularly when the nature of their encounter became known. Medical scans confirmed what they had already experienced. Exposure to the Gentle One's energy had created subtle but significant improvements in their cellular health and neural function. Val, perhaps the most transformed by the experience, dedicated himself to establishing the ethical research protocols the Gentle Ones had suggested. His ambition remained, but had been redirected toward building relationship rather than exploitation. The possibilities for medical advancement remained vast, but would now unfold through cooperation instead of capture. In her quarters, Alara spent hours updating stellar charts, incorporating the new data about the Argyll Veil. As she worked, she couldn't help but notice how the intricate patterns of nebula currents resembled neural pathways, as if the entire formation functioned as a vast, distributed consciousness with the Gentle Ones as its most evolved expression. Adding the sentience marker? Monroe asked, stopping by her workspace. Alara nodded, implementing a new classification on her charts, one that designated the Argyll Veil not merely as an astronomical phenomenon, but as a living, conscious entity deserving of protection and respect. This changes everything, she said quietly. Not just our understanding of this nebula, but how we approach exploration everywhere. What else have we encountered that might be sentient in ways we failed to recognize? That's the question that will drive the next phase of exploration. Monroe studied the completed chart with satisfaction. Humanity's view of alien life just shifted permanently. Later, as Alara prepared the first official communication to be sent into the nebula using their new protocols, she found Monroe in the observation dome. The commander stood at the viewport, watching the nebula's colors shift and swirl in the distance. Having second thoughts? She asked, joining him. Monroe shook his head, reflecting, all these years exploring, cataloging, claiming. And the most important discovery we've made is how to ask permission instead of taking. We escaped the beasts, Alara noted, but found guardians. More than that, Monroe replied thoughtfully. We found a mirror, their collective consciousness, their balance of ecosystem roles, their choice to heal rather than harm. It's everything we aspire to be. As Station Halcyon began preparations for the first official diplomatic mission to the Gentle Ones, the question lingered in Alara's mind. What defined true gentleness? The power to heal or the wisdom to choose compassion over conquest? The answer, she suspected, would continue to unfold in the relationship between two very different forms of consciousness, reaching across the void to understand each other. Beyond the station's boundaries, the Argyll Veil continued its eternal dance of color and light, no longer just a frontier to be conquered, but a neighbor to be respected and perhaps, in time, a teacher to be honored.